Hi everyone, Miss Piro here. We are going to continue our study on evolution and natural selection by taking a quick look at this article on giraffes. So at one time, giraffes came in a variety of neck lengths. Some giraffes had very short necks and others had long necks like the ones we see today. The short-necked giraffes ended up dying off and only the long-necked giraffes survived. So why do we think this happened? Well, the giraffes with the shorter necks couldn't compete with the long-necked giraffes. Food supplies were limited at that time, and all species were in constant competition with one another over resources like food and shelter. So, unlike the giraffes with the long necks, the short-necked giraffes couldn't reach the leaves and twigs up high in the trees, as well as any food resource closer to the ground. So if you take a look at this picture right here, we have some giraffes with short necks and some giraffes with long necks. You can see how the giraffes with the long necks could very easily get the food resource, the leaves and the twigs, from all parts of the tree, including anything they could find on the ground, while the short-necked giraffes could really only reach this lower part of the tree. And because they didn't have long necks, it would be very difficult for them to get any food resource they found on the ground. So over time, only the giraffes with the long necks survived. In the 18th and 19th centuries, there were two competing theories about why this happened. One theory came from a French scientist named Jean-Baptiste Lamarck, and the other came from an English naturalist named Charles Darwin. More evidence supported Darwin's theory because many other animals could eat the low-lying vegetation, and fewer short-necked giraffes didn't get enough to eat. So over generations, the giraffes with the longer necks grew stronger and healthier. And the long-necked giraffes had more giraffe babies that, like their parents, inherited those long necks and were better able to survive when food became scarce, which is something that often happens in the natural world. No other animal could reach the high leaves as well as they could. So over time, more and more short-necked giraffes died before they could reproduce more short-necked giraffe babies. Eventually, only long-necked giraffes were born, and this process of change is called natural selection, and it happens in all species. We should note that a giraffe's long neck is called an adaptation, and it's a trait that helps an organism fit in and survive in its environment. And we're going to learn more about adaptations as we continue to study evolution and natural selection. So let's take a look at the three pictures here. We can see in the first picture that we have giraffes, both with long necks and with short necks. And you can see in the first picture that the giraffes with the short necks have to stand on their hind legs to get any food resource that the tree has, while it seems like it's quite easy for the giraffes with the long necks to get in and get those leaves and twigs that they eat. In the second picture, we see that now most of the giraffes have long necks, and there's only one individual that has a short neck. And that individual is still standing on its hind legs trying to get whatever food resource it can, any leaves and twigs on this part of the tree, while the giraffes with the long necks seem to have no problem reaching the leaves and the twigs on the higher parts of the tree. By the time we get to the third picture, all of the giraffes have long necks, and so we can see the natural progression that the short neck was not an advantage to have during this time. And so because the individuals with short necks couldn't get enough food in order to live longer and to reproduce, the individuals with the short necks end up dying, and therefore that short neck DNA is not passed on to the next generation. Only the long necks, the long neck DNA is passed on, and so we see individuals from generation 1 to generation 2 to generation 3. We see the individuals with the short necks end up dying off, and the individuals with the long necks survive. So let's take a look at the different theories. Darwin's theory, Charles Darwin was an English naturalist who studied variation in plants and animals during a 5-year voyage around the world. He explained his ideas on evolution in a book called On the Origin of Species, and it was published in 1859. The main features in his theory state that individuals compete for limited resources. Limited resources in this case is like food, shelter, and the right to mate. Individuals in a population show natural variation. So just like in the giraffes with their neck variation, some individuals have long necks and some individuals have short necks. There's going to be variation in every population of a species. In humans, we show natural variation in our height. Some individuals are tall and some individuals are short, and then there's a range in that tall and short where individuals kind of land. The third point states that individuals with characteristics best suited to their environment are the ones that are going to probably end up surviving long enough to reproduce. And so that leads us to the last point, which is successful characteristics are inherited. So species that are unable to compete successfully eventually become extinct. And again, we're saying this word compete, and this we're talking about competing for those limited resources, the right to mate, food, and shelter. Darwin's ideas caused a lot of controversy back in his time and today because they can be seen as conflicting with religious views about the creation of the world and the creatures that live in it. Taking a look at Lamarck's theory, Darwin wasn't the only person to help develop a theory on evolution. Jean-Baptiste Lamarck was a French scientist who developed an alternative theory at the beginning of the 19th century. And his theory kind of centered on two features or two ideas. The first being the law of use and disuse, and the second being the law of inheritance of acquired characteristics. So Lamarck's theory said that a characteristic which is used more and more by an organism becomes bigger and stronger, and one that isn't used ends up disappearing eventually. Any characteristic of an organism that is improved through use ends up being passed on to the offspring. So let's summarize the two different explanations for the long necks that we see in giraffes today. So based off of Darwin's theory, a giraffe with a longer neck can reach food high up in the trees in addition to food on the ground. And so because of that, that giraffe is more likely to get enough food in order to survive and reproduce, which would allow it to pass that long neck DNA off to its offspring. So the offspring would inherit that long neck. That seems to be an advantage. Lamarck, based on Lamarck's theory on why a giraffe would have a long neck, his theory looks at the fact that a giraffe would stretch its neck to reach the food high up in the trees or low on the ground. And so because the giraffe's neck gets longer because it's used a lot more, and therefore that giraffe's offspring would inherit the long neck because that individual stretched its neck and used its neck a lot. So the neck got used a lot and the neck became stronger because it got used a lot. So based on what we have studied in genetics and even just the information we have from today, Lamarck's theory was eventually discredited by the scientific community because acquired characteristics don't have a genetic basis. And we talked about acquired characteristics when we studied genetics. So individuals that, acquire a scar throughout their lifetime The scar doesn't get passed on to its offspring because the scar is not embedded in the DNA of the individual. All right, so any acquired characteristics, acquired meaning the individual got that characteristic throughout that individual's lifetime, and it's not something found in the individual's DNA. So I hope that this helps you guys understand these theories a little bit more. As always, please reach out if you have any questions. Talk to you soon. Bye.